Ryan Pace is not popular today. The Andy Dalton, I could argue, is the literal worst fit possible. What was your, for a city you love and go to occasionally, what was your takeaway on Andy Dalton to the Bears?
Well, anytime you have the opportunity to sign a guy for no draft compensation and $3 million, and you're like, no, instead we'll give Nick Foles $21 million and a fourth-round pick, and then a year later give the guy you could have signed $10 million and you still have Foles, it's not a great day for you, Colin. And when it's leaked out, like, hey, Russell Wilson wants to be there and you can't make that trade happen, it only compounds it. I happen to think Matt Nagy might be a pretty good coach.
Yeah.
If you look at Matt Nagy, I think he's like 28-20, and you look at the quarterback situations, like, oh, I just think Pace's first big decision was hiring John Fox. That wasn't great. He traded up for Mitch Trubisky. That wasn't great. The quarterback situation, it hasn't been great, and I saw you lay out the reasons that Dalton is the exact wrong option and the different quarterback decisions he's made. It's not ideal, and if you're Chicago, if you're a Bears fan, I would be a little nervous in this regard, not just because you have Andy Dalton as your quarterback, that always makes you nervous, but because there is nothing more dangerous in sports than having a GM who knows, if I don't win right now, I'm fired, because he doesn't have to then worry about the future of the franchise. So I wouldn't be shocked if the Bears make some type of impulsive move to try to coat over what is the quarterback situation. And also, Colin, one last thing. I think you've said this, but I just want to reiterate the point. Since Sid Luckman, the best quarterback they've had is Jay Cutler. That's 70 years, and the best they've had is Jay Cutler. That ain't great. It's really not great.
So, by the way, Elway's 0-9 since Peyton Manning, and Deshaun Watson. I mean, if I'm John Elway and I read in the paper this morning, Deshaun Watson says, I want to play for Denver, San Francisco. I don't even think there's a ceiling on what I could give. I mean, Elway basically had to step out of the GM role because he couldn't get the quarterback right. Otherwise, he'd still be there.
That's right.
So your takeaway on Deshaun just naming Denver.
My takeaway is if Deshaun is traded, he will be the most valuable player ever traded in NFL history. Now, we've had better players traded. Randy Moss got traded. But a 25-year-old franchise quarterback on a reasonable contract, there has never been a more valuable, if you want to use this term, asset that changed hands in NFL history. So there is no price too high to pay, especially when you're Denver. And the one time you've gotten the quarterback situation right was, oddly enough, when Houston could have signed Peyton Manning but wanted to stick with Matt Schaub, so he picked you as his second choice. Since Elway, they've gotten the quarterback right once, and it's when Peyton Manning fell in their lap. So I agree with you. Now, I am a little disappointed because your old buddy Nick Wright is old enough to remember when Uncle Colin was Drew Lock this, Drew Lock that, are we sure about Mahomes? I love Drew Lock. Now you're throwing him out with yesterday's garbage, but you know, it's better late than never. I agree with you. If he wants to go to Denver, anything you can trade would not be too much.
So now the word's out. Ian Rappaport's Seattle, Chicago, they met, they talked, there were offers, they slept on it. And Pete Carroll's like, I'm 70, I don't want to rebuild. I look at it and I think, Russell did kind of call out the offensive line. It's not great. I do feel that Pete's gotten too much credit. Russell, not enough for the success. Where do you stand on that relationship today?
Well, where I stand is I think both parties are somewhat misplaying their hand. Seattle, I think, is misplaying it because if the guy wanted offensive linemen, why didn't you sign one? Kevin Zeitler was available. He played with Russ at Wisconsin. Baltimore grabs him. Joe Thuney's available. The Chiefs get him. Trent Williams, I guess he wasn't going to leave San Francisco, so they gave him all that money. He stays there. Like, the quality offensive linemen that you could have signed are going by the wayside. I think Russ misplayed his hand because his list was a bad list, Colin. You had Dallas. If Dallas was going to trade Russ for Dak, fine, but they weren't, so take them off. You have the Saints. He might as well have demanded a trade to the Brooklyn Nets. It has likelihood of happening. The Saints can't make the money work. You have Chicago. Chicago was interested, but Chicago can't provide the draft pick to get you the quarterback. And then you have the Raiders, seemingly because Russ wanted a good offensive line, and the Raiders' answer to that was, how about we cut all of our offensive linemen? And so now I feel like unless Russ is going to come up with a new list, Seattle is sitting there saying, well, is the grass always greener? My answer would be your franchise in its entire history had pre-Russell Wilson had one kind of fun moment with Matt Hasselbeck and Sean Alexander. And other than that, you've been the team in the Pacific Northwest that nobody really cares about. And then you had Russell Wilson, and you are a premier franchise. Do everything you need to do to make him happy, but it doesn't seem like that's the route they're wanting to take. And I don't know that Russ has a great option, at least this offseason, as far as a team that's going to trade for him.
So and Joy and I had said, Cam Newton, bring him back. There's not a lot of options on the market. You're not going to get Darnold. I thought it made sense. And, I said yesterday, if you'd have said this a couple years ago, the greatest quarterback ever left a franchise, and you'd be like, well, how did they do the next year? They were 7-9 in a pandemic. And then the next year, they brought the quarterback back, and they actually went 10-6. You'd be like, well, that's not terrible. Brady's just been so successful that it makes New England look pathetic. Right. And then the free agency happens, and I'm like, they look like a playoff team again with Cam Newton. They honestly do this morning. Your takeaway on their free agency frenzy.
Well, I think that the playoff team might come down to, is Cam healthier? Because, and I love Cam, and I've watched every game Cam's played as a pro, in part because I think I've bet on Cam in almost every game he's played as a pro. It hasn't always worked out for me. But he did not look right last year. He was one-hopping passes with some regularity. Let's assume he's right. Then, yeah, I think they absolutely, especially with the expanded playoffs, can contend. And who's to say Buffalo won't take a step back? Hey, Bills Mafia, I'm still here, still doubting you guys. But I do think the free agency frenzy, the bigger story there is, it's Bill Belichick tacitly admitting he has blown it in the draft the last half decade. They signed 2 tight ends. Well, they drafted 2 third-round tight ends a year ago. They signed 2 wide receivers. Well, they drafted a first-round receiver and traded a second-rounder for Mohamed Sanu a couple years ago. They have not been able to hit on these draft picks. Here is a wild stat, Colin. Aside from their punter, the last Pro Bowler the Patriots drafted was Jamie Collins in 2013.
Wow.
So one of the reasons you got to go out there and spend is because Bill Belichick, the head coach, has been an A+. But Bill Belichick, the GM, has had some rough moments up to and including evaluating Tom Brady, I suppose, and saying, you know what? Nick Wright has it right. The guy's cooked. He shouldn't have listened to me. He should have listened to everyone else who said, maybe you stick with the GOAT. Maybe you just run it back with Tom Brady.
Let me ask you a basketball question. Have to. You are an advocate of all things sure. LeBron James. Once again, as I've said with Anthony Davis, he's not an 82-game guy. That's not who he is. We don't want our quarterbacks throwing 60 times a game. We don't want our running backs with 40 carries. It's okay to realize certain players give you certain things. AD, to me, is 58 games, rest him in playoffs. That does beg the question, so the Lakers have a winning record without AD and just LeBron carrying them. He is the MVP, right? Like it feels obvious, right?
Well, right. It was very close. It was LeBron and Embiid or Embiid with LeBron. But Embiid's, the biggest thing against him was he had missed a half dozen games, and now he's going to be out a few more weeks. And now it's LeBron and a massive gap between he and everyone else. But I will tell you what's going to happen, Colin. What's going to happen is LeBron is going to stay for a lot of people. Watch this now. He'll be in second place all year, and the person in first is going to rotate. It was Embiid. Here in about a week, you know what it's going to be? You know who the MVP is. Nothing against LeBron. It's James Harden. And then a few weeks after that, when Kevin Durant comes back and Harden's numbers go down a bit, you know what people are going to say? Guys, we can't hold the playoffs against Giannis. It's a regular season award. Nothing against LeBron. Giannis is the MVP. And I can't wait for it. By the end of the season, you know what the argument's going to be?
What?
Guys, Nikola Jokic, look at his numbers. The Joker, he's the MVP. And this whole time, we're going to be like, or it's the best guy on the best team who plays damn near every night. And I'm going to add a little bonus take for you, Colin.
All right.
In 2017 and 2018, one of the reasons people argued against voting for LeBron, 2017, coming off the title, 2018, when Kyrie had left and the Cavs were still awesome, was because, guys, you got to play both ways. And LeBron doesn't care about defense. Well, right now, the Lakers have the number one defense in basketball by a mile. The gap between them and second place is bigger than the gap between second place and 10th place. And Anthony Davis isn't anchoring that defense. LeBron James is. So if it's going to be LeBron versus Harden or LeBron versus Jokic, and you've held defense against him when he was lackadaisical on that end, then this year, when he's a defensive player of the year candidate, it's got to work for him. So I disagreed with you and Joy last year. Last year, I thought Giannis was the MVP. This year, up to this point, there's no question it's LeBron James. And that's not because I'm an advocate for all things LeBron James, as you said it. I'm an advocate for truth and fairness in media.
Yes.
And that, my friend, is truth and fairness in media.
That was one of your stronger bonus takes.
I hear Joy snickering.
No. That was just a bonus take. I mean, that was a bonus take. That wasn't even one of your takes. That was a very strong bonus take. Seriously, that's like the
toy and a happy meal.
I am snickering, though.
The chef comes out at the end of the meal and gives you free something, a little something. It's the best thing in the meal. You'd be like, wow, that was a good freebie.
Yeah.
Excellent work, Nick Wright. Appreciate that. Correct. First things first.
Thank you. Good to see you guys.
Good to see you guys. Hi, everybody. Thanks for watching. Subscribe here to get the latest from the show. Also, be sure to check out more of the best clips from The Herd or go watch a few segments from other shows on FS1.